everyone, and welcome to my action research presentation. So for my thesis this semester, I wanted to talk about the impact of video instruction in Common Core mathematics. So obviously we've all been living in a world, hopefully post-COVID, doing our best to kind of adjust. But as far as using the tools of online instruction, I wanted to see how video instruction could really play a role for my students. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to kind of run through the background and my thought process of why I chose this topic. I'm going to talk about the research questions that I really wanted to investigate. I'm going to talk about the methodology I used and how I analyzed my data and the findings that we were reported from my students. And then we'll conclude and I'll give you my recommendations. So let's get right into it. So for my background, you'll see that I kind of start off with this blurb here of how more often than not, students struggle with the content covered in high school mathematics. Nowadays, it is common for teachers to hear from students complaints about math. They also show a great lack of interest in the subject, which is the basis of the scientific growth of a country and enhances the individual's logical reasoning, critical thinking, and investigative habits. Now, this blurb that I got right there was from 2016. Now, they also go on to talk about how if we address the issue, teachers must find ways to make interactive lessons that will capture student attention. And on top of the distractions that the typical classroom can experience, now teachers are also battling with the fact that many students have been negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that's something really important to highlight on here is that in 2016, we were already recognizing the lack of interest by students. They have so many different things that they can be paying attention to, especially at a high school level. They have phones, they have iPads, they have all their own devices, and they have a lot of stuff that they're utilizing on a regular basis. So there's a lot of room for distraction. Our job is to find a way to make those tools. Now, the other part that I wanted to bring about is the fact that I referenced that COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, all teachers and students have been affected by this pandemic as well as everyone in the world. It's a worldwide situation that we've all kind of had to make adjustments to. Personally, I still feel like my students haven't readjusted. And to that same standard, some teachers and myself haven't really readjusted the whole way as well. But in the perspective of my students, they don't really remember how to be students sometimes. This is their first year back into a classroom traditionally where they're fully back, and there's a lot of gaps and holes that are still missing. So, as we kind of proceed, I was trying to find ways that you can level out that playing field and kind of help students along the way and kind of make up for the stuff that they missed while still preparing them for their end of the year exams. So for me, I thought that incorporating online videos would really help. That way students could have those videos as references. They can go back and rewatch. They can skip ahead if they know those stuff or they remember that stuff from years prior. And they kind of can control the pace at which they learn. And then we would have some more time for in-class practice where they can come into the classroom and as long as they watch their video the night before or the period before, wherever they plan to do, then they can kind of talk about how they would be able to practice and we can kind of do that together and I can kind of see where they are and kind of get that feedback from them and kind of have more time to make it a little bit more personalized learning. Originally, my focus was going to be primarily on a high school geometry setting. Now, the reason I chose that was because out of all the mathematics classes that I've ever taught, I've always seen students struggle the most with geometry. Now, geometry, while it's a really important concept of showing students how to be problem solvers and kind of think critically and think outside the box, it typically is a struggle for students, even though it's that first level of the advanced regions diploma, it really can cause students a little bit of turmoil. A lot of times students are so not used to that style of mathematics to think conceptually instead of kind of hey, here's a formula, this is what we're going to use, we're going to kind of move forward in that process. Now in geometry, it's the first time that you're kind of expecting them to think outside the box, but still be able to understand why it's so relevant to their real life. And as many real world examples you could throw in there, they're still kind of stuck when they're wrapping their heads around the big ideas and how those connect and why it's important. And because those are kind of abstract concepts, you typically see students that will struggle in these areas. So originally my goal was to kind of focus on this area so that way I could provide videos with more really visual representations and kind of run through how to do a proof or how to do a transformation or a rigid motion. And even when I would use trig and all these different kind of features of the math that I would be using, I thought it would be really relevant to kind of start there. So I did start with that idea, But the more I did it, the more I was getting that feedback from my students. I kind of realized that this didn't just have to be about geometry. While I was starting there, it was a good forefront to start with. I realized that, maybe it would be really important to do this with my Algebra 1 students. So my Algebra 1 students will see a little bit are like a little bit of a lower level for the most part, but they still have to take the Regents exam and pass for high school graduation. So I started to think about how it'd be a little bit more relevant to include them as well. I did that because obviously COVID-19 had an effect on everyone. So because of that, and because they had some pieces that I know that might be blurry from years prior, or maybe there were certain topics that got cut out just due to planning and trying to manage and reacclimate into a classroom, or for the students that were remote last year or chose to be remote and might have lost some things from being at home and still trying to transition into that new world, I figured this was really important to include Algebra 1 in this as well, just to kind of see what they thought. And I really wanted their feedback on whether or not they thought video instruction could really be useful to them as well. Now, one of the questions I asked in my pre-survey you'll see here is, have you ever felt comfortable with math content in class and later that day attempted an assignment and felt unsure and unable to complete the work? And 100% of the students that I surveyed on this question said yes. So I thought this was a real big red flag for me, that whether it was homework or a classwork assignment they were finishing, that every student's at least experiences at least one time. And it's hard. And there's always those debates about whether or not homework is relevant or necessary. And, we talk about how much important practice is for math. So it's hard because I want them to practice, but you also want them to feel confident to move forward. A lot of times I'll run into students who will go to try a problem and they'll be too afraid to kind of commit to the problem and even try it because they don't want to be wrong. They're more nervous about being wrong and cautious and trying to avoid that kind of feeling of failure almost. Whereas I'm trying to break that habit of take the best guess. Let's, even if you get it wrong, we could talk about why you got it wrong. We can make that understanding and we can kind of work through it. But a lot of times they're shutting down and not want to do it. And if they're nervous and they don't have the resources at home to kind of revisit, they could look at my notes from class, or they can talk to a friend. But if they're not really finding something that's really helping them kind of understand the question, now it's just kind of building on this level of frustration that just is going to keep settling in there. So I want to do something and kind of adjust in that sense of give them more resources that we can kind of move forward from home. So when I was talking about those ideas, I came up with 5 resource questions that I really wanted to pinpoint and kind of think about. The first was, how does the integration of teacher-made video lessons for Common Core mathematics students impact student motivation? The second was, do students feel more confident after utilizing the video instruction as part of their learning process? The third, is there a difference in the effect of the video instruction amongst the different courses being Algebra 1 and Geometry? Are students more likely to collaborate with their peers after video instruction has been made available to them? And 5, from the integration of video instruction, do students believe they are retaining more mathematical concepts? So those are the 5 big things we're going to look through as we kind of run our research. So first off, let me talk about how my methodology was going to be set up. So this was going to be an action research project where I start here at this planning idea. So when I'm talking about my planning, it's exactly what I was kind of just walking through with you, is how could I incorporate video instruction? What will be the benefits of it? Will students really feel motivated? Will they feel a little bit better about doing that? Will they feel better about having resources at home to kind of proceed with questions? Or would they rather practice in class and kind of go from there? So there's a lot of things that I really wanted to look through with that. So when I started to plan, I was really focused on, like I said, doing geometry as a whole. So then I started doing the geometry and kind of do the pre-survey with them and kind of walking through it. And then I went through and actually kind of was observing what was happening. And as I observed that this might be something really important, and I kind of already took a reflection right in the beginning of this and kind of realized, hey, it's not just for geometry. I should do this with Algebra 1 too and kind of get some different levels for my students. So, I evaluated and kind of went back and kind of got back to that first circle fast. But then when my planning again, now I was redoing my kind of pre and post surveys to kind of include Algebra 1. So now I went back to the drawing board kind of idea and incorporated Algebra 1 into this planning. And then, I started it off. So when I first started acting through it, I wanted to kind of like show students what I expected. So because I'm talking about students in my geometry classes that were from a lab class, and I was talking about my students from Algebra 1 who are following the 2-year program, the students in general typically aren't fan favorites of math. They don't typically love doing math, and sometimes you get the exception to the rule in there. But I wanted to really show them like how to use these tools as resources. So I wanted to kind of like slowly incorporate them in the beginning weeks, like maybe 1 or 2 video lessons for homework, maybe show them like in class, like here's what I expect. I want to see this as your homework. And then in class, we're going to do practice and like kind of like walk them through the models in the beginning. And then, as we got into the observing factor, that's when they were kind of like up and running a little bit more, like, okay, they knew what was expected and they kind of incorporated the lessons a little bit more until it got to be where it was every day they had a video lesson for homework, and then every day they came in and did practice. So now they were in a new routine of how our class was going to be run. And then obviously I reflected on all the research that we found and all the data that we were able to collect. So like I was saying, there was 2 ways of data collection for this research from my end. The first of which was anonymous surveys. I really thought it was important to make sure these surveys were anonymous because I didn't want students to kind of feel the need to try to tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. So I wanted to make sure this was authentic data, that this really had a true purpose. But in here, basically what happened is like my students would be provided with a survey prior to utilizing the video instruction created by their teacher, me. And after utilizing the video instruction, they will complete a post survey as well. So I collected 2 different surveys. And again, they were both completely anonymous. So that way I would get their real impact of if they really enjoy the videos, if they did not enjoy the videos, if they felt like they understood the math better, what I could do to improve the videos, if they wanted to kind of continue using those videos, and a bunch of different things. And we'll see some of those specific questions along the way in this here. But then the other thing that I did was I wanted to make sure to interview students. So, a lot of times when students are like filling out a form or a survey, they kind of will just click whichever's best fitting them, or sometimes they don't really like read too much. I thought it was really important for this type of research to sit down one-on-one with some students and kind of get their feedback and see what they like, what they don't like, what would work well for their instruction, what wouldn't work well for their instruction, and kind of really give them a chance to kind of dictate the way the classroom is going to be run from now on. It's really important that the students felt like they had a say in it, because when students feel like they have a say in the classroom, they're a little bit more eager to be part of it, I feel like, in that sense. And then, I would have one-on-one discussions so that way, and I would do my best not to lead them in any direction. I didn't want them to be any kind of response bias where, if I'm like, is math your favorite subject? And kind of like wink at them or like kind of lead them to be like, sure, Miss Vise, of course. Like, we've been with you so long. Of course it's our favorite. I wanted them to feel like the comfort level of, I didn't want to lead them in any direction. And sometimes I would have one of my co-teachers in Algebra 1 ask the questions as well, just so they wouldn't feel any type of bias in that sense, because like they knew the research was coming for me. So I didn't want them to feel like they had to answer in a specific way, but more so that I really had this general conversation with them before they did the surveys and before the interviews, that it was more important to me that they were honest, because it was something I was debating on changing the way our whole classroom was set up. So I'd rather them give me honest feedback instead of trying to tell me what they thought I wanted to hear, because it was really important that I kind of have a feedback of what's truthful. Otherwise, I might change the classroom and they might hate it. And they were just trying to tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. So I wanted to make sure they knew it was an open scenario to tell me whatever they really thought would be best for their education. And, then besides the one-on-one interviews in that sense and doing my best, I also want there to be a group discussion, because I thought talking as a class, like, we would really be beneficial as well, because sometimes one-on-one kids don't always remember like every detail of what they felt, and then it's like they hear another kid say it and they're like, oh, you know what, I kind of felt like that way too. Like maybe a kid was like, oh, at first I was frustrated because I didn't know exactly like what I was supposed to be filling in on the lessons, like what you wanted me to do for that work. But, after I practiced it a couple times, I felt better. And maybe another kid will be like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot that that's how I felt when I first started off. But that definitely was an initial struggle for me. Or, you know, I just feel like there's too many practice problems or something like that, where they can kind of build off of each other to kind of see what they liked and what they didn't like. But I would kind of differentiate between those kind of findings throughout the time. So my research sample came from all my students, but I teach in a high school on Long Island, where I'm a 10 through 12 high school, which is really rare because we're one of the few remaining schools that are high school that are only 10 through 12 that don't have that ninth grade freshman population. So the total population is near 1,800 students, and it's of a higher socioeconomic status. So we were fortunate enough that all students had access to technology because they were provided with Google Chromebooks prior to the pandemic, but also a lot of my students do have access to their own personal devices, so they can use either a phone or their own laptops or iPads or tablets, whatever they choose. So I just wanted to make sure that every time I was making a video, I was either using Google Drive to store it or YouTube, so that way they can access it on really any device that they wanted to. When you break down the students that I surveyed, 49 of them were geometry students. When I break that down, it was like 26 female or 23 were male. And it was broken up to 4 seniors, 2 juniors, and 43 sophomores. And over in Algebra 1, my students here was 27 total, where I had 7 female, 20 male, 2 seniors, 3 juniors, and 22 sophomores. So there's 2 different kind of scenarios here when I'm talking about these 2 groups of students. So for my geometry students, they've already passed the Algebra 1 Regents, which means they've guaranteed themselves a Regents diploma, and they're already, as far as the math credit goes, they are in line to graduate no matter what. What happens when they're taking geometry Regents is they are going for the Advanced Regents diploma. So that Advanced Regents diploma would have to have Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. So geometry is the first step towards the advanced. They would already have the Algebra 1 for that Regents level. But these students that I have this year were in a lab class. So that means every other day I have them for a double period. So comparatively to Geometry Honors or Geometry Regents level, they are the single period classes at different levels, where lab is a little bit more if they struggle with the concepts. They need that extra practice, and they really need reinforcement every chance they get. So it's really important to utilize that lab period to provide them with practice problems, make sure they're understanding what you're doing, kind of slow down the lesson if need be. Now, my Algebra 1 students are in the boat where they need to pass the Algebra 1 Regents to maintain a graduation, to graduate high school for us. It's a requirement in New York State. And these students that I have as sophomores primarily, they are part of they took a 2-year algebra program. So as freshmen in the middle school, as ninth graders, they took an Algebra A course, which kind of like built up their skills, kind of introduced them to certain things, and kind of spent a lot of time on certain concepts so they can kind of master those certain topics. So by the time they got to me, now I reteach them everything throughout the course and kind of get them the strategies to hopefully pass the Regents and get their graduation diploma in line. So both of these levels are typically a weaker population than some of their more traditional math students, but they're all very capable students. And I have full faith that they can all be successful in their Regents exams coming up. It's just a matter of kind of getting that perfect practice in, especially, as I've mentioned before, post the COVID-19 pandemic, where Regents exams were not required in the last 2 years. So now this is the first group which will be required to take their Regents. So that being said, typically these groups struggle the most with these Regents exams. It's my goal to kind of get them through so that way they don't have to retake it in August, or they don't have to get stuck retaking the course. So primarily, these students kind of need a little bit more assistance when it comes to just knowing the conceptual ideas of math, or even just the rules patterns. Now, as I go forward too, there's this issue of trustworthiness. This is again why I had that conversation with my students in the beginning of collecting data and starting the research process. It's because at this point, my students and I have built a relationship. We made it already to 3rd quarter before I started this process and started doing and collecting data here. And, I just have a feeling that my students would want to almost answer the way they would want me, like what they expect me to want them to answer. which I wanted to make very clear for them in the beginning that there should be no fear of judgment in any way. I mean, we've created this open classroom that we can share our ideas and be open and honest with each other. There's nothing different about that right now. I want to make sure that they still feel that way when they're going into these, because again, they're anonymous, and I'm going to explain that to them, that I'm not even turning on the collecting of their email addresses, so I won't even know whose is who. I don't want to know. I just want to get their feedback, their honest opinions. And it's really more important for me to be able to run the classroom to the best of their abilities, because they're as much a part of running the classroom as I am. For me, I want to make sure that I'm doing whatever they is helping them succeed, whatever they think is going to be useful. So having that conversation with them in the beginning and like opening up that honesty, making sure that they know that the honesty is what I'm looking for. Because I don't want to make, like, I'm going to tell them making videos is a lot of work and I'm willing to do it and I'm happy to do it. But I want to make sure that they want it, that I'm not doing it and they're not even going to watch it, like something about that idea. So we have that conversation. And, in that sense of being open and honest with each other, I do trust that they will kind of share their honest opinions. And I kind of saw that when I was looking through the feedback as well. It's kind of what I would expect when I was looking at the data, but it was good. So I think it was a good conversation we had about like talking about how data collection works. And it led us into a conversation for my Algebra 1 kids about my statistics unit as well, about how it's important to get data that is meaningful and non-biased. Okay. Just before I go on to the next slide, one thing I did want to notice too as well is just that because my students have typically struggled in math in the past, I wanted them to make sure that they knew that if they felt that they didn't understand stuff, that they can share that on these forums too, that I was not going to judge them. And it's good for me to know these things so that way I can make any corrections to how I'm teaching, because I want to make sure I'm suiting their needs as best I can. So then, since we're talking about this data, let's start to talk about the big three. So as I kind of ran through the data analysis, there was three things that really stood out for me. The before and afters, the pre, the post, was the confidence level of my students, the retention ability, and the motivation. So let's start with confidence. So with confidence, on the pre-survey here, you'll see on a scale of 1 to 5, being 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, how confident are you with your math ability? Now, my students, I'm not surprised that they don't feel confidence in themselves in this case, right? Like there was a good amount of threes, which was good, almost a little bit over 40% there. A lot of ones, hardly any fives. So, it's kind of typical in the sense when I have students here that do struggle with math, and they're also, even if they're not so much struggling as much this year, they're just, I feel like to an extent, pre-noted, like just, oh, I struggle with math. Like they came in day one saying that, they still say that, like, oh, well, math is hard. Math is this, math is that. And, part of being a math teacher, especially at the high school level, is trying to break those molds, trying to change the student's opinion on how they feel about mathematics and their ability of mathematics, because they're so predetermined in those ideas. They kind of believe like, oh, well, I sucked last year, so I'll suck this year. And it's going to be a continuous process and they're just not going to feel good. But what I really felt great about from the pre-survey to the post-survey, I see a lot of improvement here. Now it's switched up where like we have a couple fives, and that was great. Like I went from, I think, 2 to 12 here. So 12 fives, so really confident. And then a lot of fours and threes. And then, still some twos and ones, but that's okay. Students are still adjusting. They're still getting used to it. Just this process alone isn't the end all be all. So, there's still some modification to be doing here. But it was really great to hear when I was working through these post surveys as well about talking about students of what they thought was good. And like a lot of them really wanted to kind of maintain utilizing these video instructions. And they talked about how they love that they can control their own path, really. Like when they were watching their video, they could watch it. I would always try to make sure that the videos were posted like the week before. Like, so on Monday they would come in and all the new videos would be up for the week. So that way, if they wanted to go ahead, they could. If they wanted to watch it in lunch so that way they can do it at that time, or if they wanted to kind of watch it the night before and then come in and do the practice problems. But just their confidence alone, I saw that growth of them kind of maturing in the sense of, they had a chance to kind of slow down. Like, it wasn't like I had to race through the lesson because I needed to get through it. It was like they could watch it and they could go back and be like, oh, I zoned out. Let me rewatch it. Or when they were doing the practice problems in class, like if no one in their group remembered how to do it, they knew that they could go back to the previous video and like find it and watch it together and kind of work it out. And like, that's what you want to see as an educator. Like, students figuring out there's a problem and they're not sure how to solve it. So they're using their resources to go back and kind of look through the videos, find where the question kind of similar to it was, and like use those steps to help them. That's exactly what I would want. And it was great just to see them feeling a little bit better about themselves, which is so much more important than the math itself, just to see that they kind of were getting into like, oh, like reminding themselves how to be a student. And because I could make videos, I could even go back and put stuff up from the year before, like a quick, like, hey, if you didn't remember how to do this, like a side video, just to have it, because why not? If it's going to help them and they're going to watch and kind of use that as something to move forward with, by all means, I am totally happy to have that up there. So it was really great to see their confidence just boost from these videos, and that's what I was hoping for. And so good to see that students felt that way. Of course, some of them might have just embellished a little bit because they think that's what I wanted to see, but I'm hoping that this is just the honest feedback. Now, the next thing was their retention. Retention, I didn't really have something on a Google form to kind of talk about, and I didn't really have it as an interview. The retention was something that I noticed organically, which was amazing as well. So like I was saying, this is something I didn't fully intend on focusing on, but it became so clear throughout the research process that I had to be sure to mention this as one of my major findings. I don't fully believe that my students would have recognized their retention increase, but from their mannerisms and their behavior in class, it was very apparent they were more focused and able to move on from question to question at a quicker pace. They were retaining the information from the videos, and when they were stuck, they knew which video to revisit and worked well with their peers to be sure they knew how to solve the problem. They would pause the video and work through step by step and make sure they arrived at the right answer. Obviously, watching the transition of their abilities in the classroom made the entire action research imperative to me to see their growth in such a positive manner. So it's kind of like I was just saying with the confidence level of them, that they were confident that they knew how to be students again, but their confidence kind of led them to make sure that it was because they were retaining information. They were thinking back to years prior. They were using the videos to help them, and then they were moving forward and showing that they could do the questions that I was asking. And they were able to master the Regents level problems, whether it was a construction or a proof that was a throwback, whether it was something of solving algebraic properties or, inequalities. It was really great to just see their abilities as they were moving forward and they were getting more and more confident with themselves. And I just don't think that they would have noticed that they were retaining so much more because, a lot of times when I do these practice things in like the first and second quarter, I would like allow them to work together and let them work. It was such a slower pace. It was like a very much more needy pace of like, can you help me? I forget how to do this one. And I'm like, oh, I know we did that on Monday, but I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start. And they were like already like defeated before they even tried the problem. They were just like, oh no, I need you to help me with this one. I can't do this one by myself. Which I'm glad they were asking. And I want that too. Like I want them to ask questions. I want them to ask for help. But I also was so proud to see them become independent learners a little bit more, especially those Algebra 1 kids who, and at first I didn't even think that I could include them in this research, that they would maybe not so much be able to handle watching the videos and coming into class, but they pleasantly surprised me. In my original intention, I didn't want to include Algebra 1 because they were from the weaker population and they do have a lot of background stories and different scenarios at home and like different things that might have just impeded on that and not been able to like watch the videos, and then they would have been watching in class and then practice. And there's a lot of things that I thought might have happened, but I was really, really excited to see that they proved me wrong and they were able to kind of grow from the process as well. And geometry, they were continuously watching their videos and like you can see them kind of master the steps as well as like as they were going through. And it was really exciting to see from both ends that they really were, even if they weren't always retaining all the mathematical concepts, they were reminding themselves of how to be a student, how to move forward, how to be a part of a classroom again. So I thought that was very important and really shows that you can do a classroom either online or in person, and like that would be a great strategy to use. And finally, motivation. So these events really should be mutually exclusive, but I believe that motivation is connected in a large part to the student's self-confidence and their retention, obviously. But I feel like students are obviously more likely to proceed if they're be motivated to proceed if they feel confident in what they're doing and they know how to do their material. Like anytime I talk to a student, it's not like any student wants to do poorly. They accept that they're going to do poorly, but they don't want that. They of course want to do well. They want to feel smart. They want to feel good about themselves. So, motivation was something that I kind of got a little bit of insight from students after having one-on-one interviews. So I talked to them like, what motivates you? Like, why do you want to do this? And like, we had different conversations. I'm like, so why haven't you been good at math before? And they were just telling me different stories about how they felt, not as important as some other students sometimes. And like a lot of them, like in different times of the year, will refer to them being in stupid math. And I always stop that. Like, what do you mean stupid math? There's no such thing as a stupid math class. There's just math. There's different levels of math, but there's no such thing as a stupid math class. But a lot of them come in saying that. And I really wanted to break that habit. And I was talking to them, and a lot of them feel that, because they're in a lower level math class, they're not as important, which is so sad to hear because you don't want any students at any level to feel that they're not important, that they don't matter. So in my school district, we do teach a lot of AP courses, and students get up to a lot of high levels, which is great and very impressive. And, I teach an AP course myself and also this, but, they have a lot of friends who are in like honors math or AP Calc or whatever the class may be. So then when you have a sophomore who is in Algebra 1 when they should have been done in freshman year, or a senior who just needs the graduation requirement in Algebra 1, or, you have the geometry kids like giving up a period every other day to be in the lab class to get that practice when like some of their other friends are going to take a different elective. They got like a little bit frustrated with themselves and defeated. And it was really great to have these conversations because it's like, it opened my eyes to like how they're feeling and how important it is to make sure that I do whatever I can to make sure they don't feel that way, because they are important. They're very, like, every student is very important, and they need to make sure they know they matter and how important they are to our class, and that they're not in a stupid math, they're just in a different math. And that's totally fine. So I always try to make sure that they know that. And I think when watching the videos, I would get that insight from them that after knowing they like watched the video, they kind of felt like they knew it. So when they were coming in the next day, they were ready to like kind of, for lack of a better term, like brag and like show like, hey guys, I know how to do this one. Let me show you how to do this one, because I really got that from the video. And like when one kid would do it, he's like, oh yeah, and then you do this. And like it was like, and then someone else would be like, oh yeah, like it was just a really good atmosphere to watch them care so much about how to do the problems and to help each other. And like the best part about it too is because they are all in this class together and there's no shame and no judgment when we talk about it, they use like the fact that it's a stupid math as like that defense mechanism, so that way they don't feel bad. But we were breaking that stigma, and they were so eager to help each other. Like if they were working in a group together, they were like, oh, let me help you with that. Oh, I know how to do that one. And previously when we used practice problems, some kids would used to ask for the answers, like, oh, what'd you get for this one? And they would just tell them. But it was a change in conversation about, oh, let me show you how to do it. Like, I can show you how to do that. I can help you with that. And it was really great. And it was really exciting to see. So I definitely think I saw a positive shift in their motivation because they felt like they knew the material a little bit better and they were ready to kind of go forward with that. So let's just quickly look at my research questions answered now. So how does the integration of teacher-made video lessons for Common Core mathematics students impact student motivation? As we just talked about, after student interviews and discussions, students were motivated to do well when they felt supported by their teachers. By the teachers incorporating video instruction, they felt more supported by their teacher, and they had more time to collaborate with their peers to understand the content. Students in geometry courses were somewhat more motivated to learn the course independently, while Algebra 1 students sometimes needed more prompting, but on formative assignments, more questions were answered diligently, and conversations amongst peers were overheard by the researcher as students worked to understand how to solve the problem and why it's done instead of just getting the answers, which is kind of what I just was wrapping up. Our second question was, do students feel more confident after utilizing the video instruction as part of their learning process? So according to our anonymous Google Forms, surveys, and classroom discussions and student interviews, all students who utilized the video instruction felt more confident when the content after using the video. They reportedly liking the ability to rewatch and pause a video and skip, and when they felt they knew what was being covered. So that was some of the sections when I asked them, like, what did you like about the videos? That was a big one that came up, that they had the ability to pause and move forward or rewind if they needed to. So that was great. Third question here, is there a difference in the effect of the video instruction amongst the different courses? So again, students in geometry class were more motivated to watch videos and reinforce their understanding of the concept being covered. But Algebra 1 students would watch their video, but they still needed more reinforcement by their teachers and their peers to feel fully like they clearly understood the material. But because I had that time, like because the video was already watched, so I was able to kind of move around the classroom, check in, see more students, talk to more students about how they feel, and like got to talk to them. And even so, I was able to talk to them about other stuff as well. Like if we got through the assignment early, we can kind of have more conversations, just know how like their daily lives were going, how their other classes were going, which was great. But both classes also reported they appreciated having time to practice in class due to watching the videos prior to class. And geometry students reported they appreciated having the next video ready during class in case they finished their practice and were ready to move on to the next assignment. Fourth question, are students more likely to collaborate with their peers after video instruction has been made available to them? So for the most part, I've noticed that students kind of collaborated the same way. They still use the same groups. I think because I allowed students to choose their groups, it made them more comfortable with collaboration. So right from the beginning, in the beginning of the year, really, they were all comfortable working together and kind of feeling that way throughout the lessons. But they both shared, for both courses, shared that after they working together was better after the video instruction because they had time to kind of prep themselves and know what was going to be expected of them for the next day. So if they were nervous about feeling like they didn't know what was going to go on, as long as they watched the video, they felt like they had a better chance of being ready to participate with their group. And finally, from the integration of video instruction, do students believe they are retaining more information? So students in geometry were more likely to report retaining more mathematical concepts than Algebra 1 students from the video instruction alone. However, students from both courses shared that they appreciated having more practice time where they could work on problems, collaborate with their peers, and have the teacher check their work. They felt more confident about taking the formal assessments while having video instruction incorporated into their math curriculum. So as we were doing tests along the way as well, students felt better about taking those tests because they felt they had more practice. They felt like even before the day before the test, they can go back and rewatch videos from the first lesson in case they forgot anything. And there was just more resources available to them. So overall, some of the big conclusions here, based on the findings in this research, video instruction will definitely remain a valued part of the design curriculum within my classroom. Having video instruction as an available option allowed students to control the pace at which they learn best. They were able to revisit concepts when they were stuck and when the teacher was not available. Students were also able to work better with their peers when practicing the content. Utilizing video instruction frees up time for more valuable conversations to occur that may not happen when teachers are trying to complete their curriculum with time to practice for the Regents exam at the end of the year. So again, everything that I saw from this research was positive. The students, even if they weren't the biggest fans of the video instruction, they appreciated having it. So I might not fully adapt a completely flipped classroom model where students are only watching videos for lessons. Like I might kind of pick and choose the days, but I definitely think at least 2 lessons a week would involve having a video lesson so I could make sure I incorporate that practice. You know, sometimes when I first started this idea, I would talk about flipping Friday, but I think really it's kind of like depending on the lessons and kind of talking through it, I think there could be a balance between the two. Eventually, I think maybe I would go to the full model being completely flipped where video instruction would be the lesson and then the practice would be in the day because I really did think students responded really well to it. I just think that every once in a while, it's good to kind of like do a lesson together and hands-on, depending on the content and what I need to do with certain things. But I think it's definitely a value part from now on, especially when I compare my pre and post survey here. So if I'm looking, do you think it would have helped more if your teacher posted video based on what you learned? So on the top here, you see the pre-survey. And in this pre-survey, I had students who said yes, very much so. It was only at 19%. And I had almost 29% who said no, they didn't think it would help. And then you had like that almost half that were like somewhat, and like a good portion there that even said they would probably not even watch. But then my post survey here, do you think it helped having your teacher post videos based on what you learned in class? Now the narrative completely changed to where, you know, I had almost equal split between yes, very much and somewhat. So everyone acknowledged that there was somewhat of a change that improved for them. So we're talking 46 and 44% there. So we're getting to 90% of my students thought there was something worth doing there. While we still had some no's and some that didn't watch, that's okay. I asked them to be truthful, but I thought that was really, really important that, the somewhat was really close, still on, but my 19% to a 44.3% jump, that was great. That was great to see. And then, so for my recommendations, I would truly recommend incorporating video instruction to a math classroom. Students saw an increase in attempting questions and overall became better math students. And I think they became better students in general. They were relearning like what they need to do, how to be a math student. So that was great. They learned how to use the tools, right? So we're incorporating a new tool for them. They're using it. They're moving forward. And I thought that was really important for them. And I'm really glad that they did it. I'm really glad that this is the research I chose. So for teachers looking to implement type of instruction, keep in mind it's appropriate for all levels of instruction. So that was the biggest line that I thought was really important that I put in here, because at first I almost didn't do it with Algebra 1 because my own stereotype that I started to create. Were my weaker kids going to be able to handle it? Were they going to move forward? Meanwhile, looking back, they definitely could handle it, and they might have needed it the most, right? If these are truly like the weaker level kids and they need something to kind of help them retain the information, providing them with videos instruction that are made from me and not from some person who's teaching in a different way, that what we're going to do in class is going to stay consistent, and then they have that practice that they can go back to at any point in the year and revisit, especially when we're getting ready for Regents prep at the end here or final exams. I'm glad I didn't let my own bias kind of stop me there and only to geometry. So that's just my one thing I would really make sure everyone knows. And yeah, they will be able to manage technology and grow with this resource. A lot of students, remember, even if we think they're not going to be able to handle certain things, like they're more proficient in technology than we are. They always will be. They're going to keep adapting. So we have to keep adapting in that sense. And by incorporating a change to this learning style, it's switching things up. It's giving them a new chance, and it really helped them grow. Again, as always, we might have to take some time to clearly explain the expectation and kind of show students what we want them to do and how we want them to do it. We might have to be lenient in the beginning to kind of get them on board so they understand what's expected of them. But overall, even if they're skeptical at first, I think having those open conversations and working with them and telling them what the plan is and showing them how much you care, you're going to get students who genuinely want to do good quality work, and they're going to be motivated to do well because they know how much you care about them. So I definitely think if you were debating if you should use video instruction, then let this be your reference that you definitely should, because I definitely will continue it. And I'm really glad that I did this project. And I'm really glad that everyone in here had a great semester. So I hope that we've all learned something good. And I hope this is something that you might consider carrying on to your classroom. All right. And I think with that being said, I am all about done. All right. Thanks, everyone. And hope everyone has a great rest of your night.